Mushroom Summit, and today we have Gary Hopkins Jr. Gary, give us a little bit of your background.
So my background is I'm a fourth generation mushroom farmer. My great-grandfather grew mushrooms in the infancy of the mushroom industry, and my family's progressed all the way into modern times with mushrooms. I've been growing professionally for about 7 years now, and I've been a general manager for about 2.5 years.
Gotcha. So did you go to school for mushrooms, or is it on-the-job training?
All on-the-job training. I actually have a bachelor's degree in law, so mostly reading comprehension and public speaking was the background in that. So it does apply a lot to what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to us a little bit about what you're going to be sharing today. You're going to be talking about a large operation, how the big boys do it, as it were, and talk to us a little bit about kind of like what does the mushroom industry look like right now?
So basically a broad overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through what it takes to put compost into a commercial growing facility and eventually output the finished product. So on a commercial scale, it's actually fairly similar to how you would do it on a small scale, just bigger and with heavier pieces of equipment. Everything you'll see here today would be the process if you were going to do it on a small scale. So it is directly applicable. You just wouldn't use this large of a truck or this large of conveyors. It would just be a smaller scale.
Yeah. Now talk to us about the type of mushroom we're going to be basically that you'll be demonstrating.
So today we're going to do the overview of white button mushrooms and brown mushrooms. Other than technical details as far as growing them, they grow in exactly the same compost, exactly the same peat moss. They're handled the same. It's the same equipment. The only real difference going to be what your spawn and what your cack is as far as growing these.
Yeah, and this would be the most common mushroom that's seen in the U.S.
By far. The white button mushroom is actually the most popular in the commercial market. However, since COVID struck and the restaurant industry has obviously taken a big impact, the cremini market has surged. So we sell about 10% less white mushrooms now than we did this time last year, and about 40% more browns. So the whites are still ahead of the browns, but as the months go on, they're losing more and more ground, which is extremely problematic for us in a commercial sense, because you can get about 30% more production out of the white mushrooms than you can out of the browns.
So it's hurting your margins.
Extremely. It makes it a lot more difficult.
Gotcha. Very interesting. Well, why don't we just dive into the photos you've got, just showing the process, and I'll ask some questions along the way.
Okay, awesome. So this is going to be your traditional compost truck, and I'll just touch on our compost briefly. In our industry, worldwide, there's about 25 people who can actually produce compost effectively. It is an extremely difficult science, and even the professionals only get it right about 70% of the time. About 30% of our year, we have a lot of compost problems, and we struggle quite a bit. So for anybody who wants to get into it, I would highly suggest finding a reputable compost manufacturer and doing it that way. I've been in the industry my entire life, and it would be very difficult for me to get you functioning compost, especially for the amount of dollars you're going to have to invest into the product versus what you're going to get out. Like, we can get compost as cheap as $120 a ton. So for $120, it would be very difficult for you to produce a ton of compost.
Yeah. And from that ton of compost, how many pounds of mushrooms is that produced normally?
Usually you get per 20, if Liz has a calculator, but for every 28 pounds of compost, you get about 8 pounds of mushrooms. So do 2,000 divided by 28, and then times 7. So you get per ton, you get about 500 pounds of mushrooms.
Okay. Yep, that makes about sense. Wow, that's actually a relatively good deal when you think about it.
Yeah, and for $120, I mean, a very reasonable market average for commercial mushrooms would be about $1.15 a pound. So you figure you spend $140, you're looking at well over $600 of mushroom sales.
Well, and that's at, I think you're saying, wholesale prices.
Yes. Yeah, that would be true wholesale.
Yeah, that's true wholesale. Very interesting, because like when we're talking specialty mushrooms, specialty mushrooms like the lion's mane, the oysters, we're seeing anywhere from $8 to $16 to even lion's mane even $20 a pound.
And for a farmer's market style, or that level of quality and care that goes into those kind of mushrooms, that's a very different growing process. That's why you're going to see higher prices. It's much more careful, and it's less volume based, more quality based. A very reasonable price is $4 to $6 a pound for that side, because you're dealing with a much smaller scale. It's much more intricate. They're much more careful with what they're doing. So obviously you're going to have to pay more for that sort of thing.
Very cool. All right, so this is a mushroom truck, and a mushroom truck's basically a giant dump truck, right?
To an extent. The compost trucks we use here, and this I'll show you, I have a side view as well. The compost truck itself actually has a walking floor. So the floor has two independent floors that actually almost like interlacing your fingers together, and they pass the compost along, so you constantly get a nice steady flow.
Yeah.
At the facility this was filmed at, they're very fortunate that they don't have to work under a roof. Where a lot of farms, they'll have overhead wires, they'll have all that sort of thing. So you need a truck that doesn't have to raise, it doesn't have to dump. It's always going to be a nice, steady, measured flow.
Gotcha.
As you can see to the right, and the next picture will show it a little better, this is the hopper that the truck dumps into.
Okay.
So those metal slats that move up the slope, that's going to carry the compost into the next phase, which is a kickback. At the absolute top, you'll see it looks like a rotating drum. That's going to be your kickback. So if you have too much compost going in, it's going to kick it back to the bottom of the pile.
So it's bringing just a very exact amount of flow through every minute.
Absolutely. Because, and as we'll see as we go forward, all of this is done by hand from this point forward. So as soon as it leaves the conveyors, it's actually going to be two guys with pitchforks leveling it and working with it. So you want it to be as close as humanly possible, so the guys aren't, beating themselves to death underneath.
And this is from, one of the big suppliers in Kennett Square. So, this is like how the industry does it, which blows my mind that it's still done by hand just because of how tight the spaces are.
Yeah, everything you see here, about 60% of the mushrooms produced in the country are done exactly like this. The other 40% are the Dutch style, which is a much more advanced style. However, it's significantly more expensive. The operating cost, the facility itself. However, you make up more in yields and quality, and there's a lot of places that will only purchase mushrooms from the modern facility.
Oh, interesting. Are they like cleaner or just...
Cleaner's a tricky aspect of it. They appear nicer because they're a much tighter facility. But the cleanliness and the hygiene, no matter how new the building is going to come down to the people who are running the facility.
Yeah.
So you can have a brand new facility that appears cleaner, but when you start actually doing testing and inspection, it's not as clean as it appears. But whenever you walk in a fancy new building with a bunch of computers and that kind of stuff, you're already like, oh, they're doing stuff right.
Yeah.
So you kind of. So it gets tricky. Like the facility we're going to see here, it was actually built in the 1950s. So it's a very old facility.
Yeah. So the compost that's coming in, talk to us about what that is a mix of.
Each compost manufactures their own blend, but in general, you're going to have regular straw.
Yep.
You're going to have horse manure straw, chicken manure, cottonseed hulls, and then cocoa husks, which are the shell of a cocoa bean.
Yep.
And then you're going to have a few other things mixed in depending on what the customer is actually looking for. We use a lot of corn fodder, which is like what's left of the corn stalk post-harvest. That's more of a filler and a nutrient. It's a very cheap way to bring your cost of compost down. And it doesn't negatively affect you until you get more than 10% of the actual compost.
Okay.
So it's a nice filler.
Yeah, when we lived in upstate New York, we were 8 hours from Kennett Square area, and Saratoga racetrack was literally right next door.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, there would be a line of tractor trailers being loaded with all the horse manure from the track and headed straight down to Kennett Square.
Yeah, and that actually, it's funny you say it, that still happens today. There's trucks just lined up waiting for it. And it's actually gotten to the point now where they charge us to take it. It used to be the opposite. And the interesting thing is supplement, which we'll get to later, is a corn or soy-based product.
Yeah.
It's usually it increases your yield up to 10% if you use the correct supplement rate. The corn supplement is actually the shell of a kernel of corn is all it is. It's a byproduct of animal feed. So animal feed, they don't like the shell because it's very hard to digest. So they'll take the shell off of it and then grind it, and then we get the grindings for mushroom supplement.
Very interesting.
So, anyways, we'll hit on that too.
Yeah.
But so this will be a video of, I think this is going to be a video of the filling, the actual filling itself. We'll give it a second. But basically what you can see here, we can actually talk about how the building's structured to begin with. On the left-hand side next to the door, you'll actually see it looks like a metal ring stuck in a door. Yep. We put those into the opening you see right there.
Yep.
And that's what you're going to hook backup units to, which are auxiliary air conditioners. So we use them during spawn run a lot because you don't necessarily want to pay for the entire unit to have a much larger unit for the entire process. You just want to basically have it when you need it, and then you can move it to another room that you need it in. So right here, you're going to see this is where the walking floor is activated. This is actually a controller. Can you guys see my mouse?
Yep, we absolutely
can.
Fabulous.
All right, so right here is where a controller gets fed in. This is an emergency stop button. So the controller is going to control the rate in which the compost comes out. So the operator, generally, they're very experienced. They would have been working on the filling gang for years. They know what the rate should look like. They're going to adjust the rate of the walking floor to fall into the yellow hopper at the appropriate rate. So you shouldn't need the kickback necessarily. So the compost is then going to fall into the hopper. It's going to work its way up a conveyor here, and then it's going to hit that kickback at the top. Inside of here, there are two rotating axles that have basically large spikes, and they're going to break up any of the compost that's kind of balled up or gummy or anything like that.
Okay.
So the next part of the process, you're going to see the broken up compost will be falling onto a first conveyor right here.
Gotcha. Yep.
So depending on how your farm is set up, you're going to need to have different conveyor lengths and that sort of thing. And the only thing you're limited by in your conveyor lengths is legally what are you allowed to travel down the road with. So in Pennsylvania, 40 feet is our limit for agricultural in this county. Everywhere is different. So,
Gotcha.
So it's going to travel up the conveyor and into the room. So it's going to go straight in, and at the top of the conveyor, we'll see it on the next video, it can actually kick to either side.
Ah.
So this conveyor up here will kick back, so it can kick to the left or to the right, depending on which side of the building you're filling. All the mushroom houses are divided into singles, so there's A single and B single. So when you're filling A single, it's going to be the first rack of shelves and then the second rack of shelves. So they'll fill it back and forth the entire time. So the compost is going to drop out of there onto, this is a net right here. So this net right here is actually being pulled from the front of the room by a hydraulic winch.
Okay.
So this individual back here, his job is to keep the net square. You don't want to get bunched up and you don't want to get torqued. So he's going to keep the net square while the compost falls down below onto this section here.
Okay.
When they finish filling this section, they'll put bedboards down here and they'll repeat the process on the next level. So the compost is going to fall down into here, and these two gentlemen here are going to be working a pitchfork, and they'll be leveling it as it goes. This area right here is just a passive roller, so it's going to roll it down to however much pressure the grower desires.
Okay.
So I like my beds very compact because the airspace within the compost will actually create hot spots because it'll have room to react faster than the other areas.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So to me, I'd rather have it a little overpressed than underpressed. So as we can see here, they're going to level it out, and it's a short video. We can run through it again. So again, it falls down through here, and you can see how it's already started on the other side. They have two beds done.
Yep.
It falls down here. He's going to keep the net straight, and these guys are going to level it out with pitchforks.
Okay.
Now, these guys will routinely handle 140 tons a day of compost. It's a very normal fill for us. So each truck only holds about 25 tons. So it's quite a lot of trucking back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that goes back to this area is the most popular for mushrooms, because the farther away you go, the more you're going to have to pay for that trucking.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, now I notice everything's wooden here, and someone told me that wood will actually be attacked by the mushrooms, but do you have to replace the wood, or is that not happening?
I've the more problems we have than the fungus actually inoculating the boards or messing with them, because it's really not in there enough to do the damage. Most of the damage for us is just the sheer weight. I mean, each of these rooms will have about 160 tons of material on these boards.
Yeah.
They get pressure washed every 8 weeks, every time we clean them out, and then they get steamed for 48 hours 2 times. So they'll get steamed while the crop is still in there, and then they'll get steamed again when the room's empty. So that's our sanitation.
Yeah.
So in here, this is going to be right after they get done filling, they're going to put plastic on top of the beds. We use the plastic here that has holes drilled about every 4 inches. We use that to keep the CO2 level and the moisture inside the bed as high as possible. As soon as that CO2 drops below about 4,000 parts per million, it'll actually start pinning even on top of the compost. So we won't even get a chance to put the casing layer on. And then it is very difficult to keep the moisture up in the compost without the casing layer on top of it. So we use the plastic in this configuration to keep the moisture in. You can actually see on top of here, here's the nets we were talking about above.
Yep.
And then our next phase, so this would be the orientation of the room. This room has 7 beds high, so they're all virtually identical. And then this would be the upstairs where you'd walk on the 2nd floor.
So these are 2 stories high then?
Yes. There's some that have gone 3 stories high, but the return just hasn't been the same.
Okay.
So this down here is a fogger. So it's an electric fogger that creates, we use a chemical called Myconet, which is it's organic certified. It's 4 or 5 different compounds that actually, it seals the mouth of the fly shut so it can't feed. So that's how it kills it. So it's not actually the chemical itself that kills it. It seals the mouth up so that they can't, so that if you or I consumed it, it would be fine because it's not going to hurt us in the same way.
It's like a super glue.
Basically, it only affects a certain, phorid flies and sierrid flies. It's the only 2 flies it affects. Even common house flies can consume it.
Fascinating.
So then we'll move on to our next photograph. So this would be what it would look like. This is a spawn run day 3. So this would be 3 days later. You can see in this case, it would be rye grain inoculate, because these are brown mushrooms, actually starting to colonize the compost. This is when your first initial heat surge is going to come, because that's when your really growth starts.
Okay.
And then the following picture. So this is going to be your internal growth inside the compost. Yep. It's starting to fuzz out. We're looking for fine growth. We don't want it to look like string. We want it to look more like a cobweb is what we're looking for. The string, go ahead.
The grain is, it comes pre-inoculated when they bring the compost to you.
Yeah, there's 2 different ways you can do it. We have ours mixed in all in one go because we feel that's the most uniform way with the provider we use. A lot of other people will actually use a machine called a spawning machine, and it'll mix the spawn and the supplement directly into the bed.
Okay.
So it depends on if your manufacturer does a really good job mixing it on site, that would be the number 1 choice. But if you don't have as much faith in your producer and you have more faith in your crew to do it, then you would go with the spawning machine side.
Okay.
So the following picture, now this is going to be for the casing stage. So this is our peat moss mix. In this room, there's 8 peat moss mixers that are just jacketed cement mixers. So they have a steam jacket all the way around the edge, and the peat moss is pre-cooked before we receive it. So the peat moss will be cooked in these mixers, and it'll drop down on a conveyor that will go up into a truck on this side, which we'll see in the next video. This machine right here is our CAC machine, which is our casing inoculant. So this is going to carefully measure the CAC onto the peat moss so you get a uniform blend going into the truck. So we will go, the next slide will be a video of the machine in process. So as you can see, we have peat moss dropping out on this side, casing on this side, CAC on this side, and it's dropping down from here. So it almost feels like sand when you mess with it.
Okay.
It'll drop down onto the peat moss where it's getting dusted, and then it goes into a conveyor that's kicking it back so that it'll be able to go into the truck pre-mixed.
Okay.
So after the truck is filled, it'll drive directly to the farm, where it's going to be placed in these casing buckets, which are just small buckets, and it is sitting on almost like a railroad car track. So this whole track is actually going to go into the room where the casing layer is going to be dumped onto the beds by each individual person. There's usually 7 men on a casing crew. So as you can see, this is a hopper out on the back of the truck. It also has a walking floor, just like the other trucks. There's going to be a button activated on this one, and the peat moss is going to drop down into each of these buckets.
Okay.
So as he fills these buckets up, he's, just eyeballing, trying to make them as uniform as possible. It makes the casing group easier. And at some point, some people will add water at this phase. I like to add water afterwards because you can kind of get a little better feel. It's hard just picking up one handful at a time. So he's going to finish filling these buckets up, and then he's actually going to jump onto this platform right here, and he's going to propel into the room. And it's all done by, kinetic force. There's no equipment, there's no batteries, there's no anything. He's just going to propel himself in there. So he'll get a running start, and then he's going to hop on and into the room. So that's how casing works. And then it'll be dumped right onto the beds, and that's pretty much it. The next thing we're going to look at, this will be 3 days after casing. So this has not been watered yet. You're going to see where it starts fuzzing out. It's going to get a nice fuzzy look to it. The biggest thing we're looking for when we're growing browns as opposed to whites, the browns, you want this white layer deeper so that it keeps the mushrooms a little more protected from disease and flies. The white button mushrooms are going to be the opposite, because you want them on top so they don't transfer any peat moss or dirt. They're not dirty when you put them in packaging, and they're less susceptible to disease. Inside, this is what internal growth is going to look like. Generally in the industry, you're looking for about 60% white, 40% black at this point. The cack itself is hydrophobic, so as you water, if you don't leave those black voids available for the water to pass through, you'll actually get what we call locked out, where the water will just run off this top layer. It won't penetrate down through the peat moss and into the compost.
Oh, okay.
Then we have, here would be a day 13. There'll be a slightly better picture next. This would be a 13-day case hold. So this is 13 days after we case the crop and 25 days after the room's been filled. So you can see the mushrooms are starting to pin, looks pretty good. We're looking for a variety of sizes so they don't all come up at one time and kind of create a canopy, because the canopy can actually trap CO2 and it'll make the mushrooms have a really long stem and they'll be leggy and they just won't be very healthy. So if you can get a different size going, that helps kind of separate your crop and you'll get more yield overall. These don't get watered from day 9 till about day 13. So you have to have enough water in them before that day 13 comes, because the brown mushrooms, you can actually kill the pins very easy by watering. You have to keep them on the drier side after pinning. The white button mushrooms are the opposite. You want to pin them early and water them early, because if you have to water them later, you're much more susceptible to bacteria blotch, which is the yellowing of the white mushrooms.
Yep.
And then your average price per pound in a commercial setting would go from about $1 to $1.40 down to about 32 cents. So they're, for all intents and purposes, worthless.
Yeah, not even worth harvesting, probably.
Yeah, you have about 15 cents in harvesting, so that only leaves you, 25 cents left overall. And if you factor in the price of compost, your labor, and all that kind of stuff, you're losing money.
Yeah.
So this is only 3 days later. So this is a case day 16 or pick day 1. So that's how much they'll move within 3 days. In general, under the right conditions, a white button mushroom or a cremini will double in mass every 24 hours.
Okay.
So this would be the finished product. You can see there's still a little variety in size, but most of them have kind of caught up with each other. So if you think about if they would have all been the same size, they would all just canopy and there'd be no space.
Yeah. Now, how much light do you have in these houses at this point?
So basically what we have are fluorescent tubes every 8 feet. So we just leave them on 24 hours a day. On non-organic farms, you have to have very, very good lighting because you're not going to get any of the coloring from chlorine. Even chlorinated city water will brown mushrooms. In completely organic farms, you have to blast them with light to get that nice dark colored cap. So that's the biggest issues. White button mushrooms, lighting is just for convenience. It doesn't affect the overall impact. It doesn't affect the color. It's for so you can see. The mushrooms don't really mind one way or the other.
Yeah, they don't mind growing in the dark.
Yeah, and for safety reasons, we have it illuminated 24 hours a day. Just the issues of someone getting hurt far outweigh the cost of electricity.
Yes.
So for us, that's a pretty simple equation.
Now I'm looking too and seeing that all these shelves are kind of bowing a little bit in the middle. That's because you're trying to use as little material to build those shelves as possible, right?
It's little material and it's just time. I mean, this room hasn't been rebuilt in about 15 years. So over the course of 15 years, it's going to sag and bow naturally. And you could do it with 4x4s, but then you start adding more and more weight, and then it actually accelerates the breakdown even more.
Yeah.
And that's another huge benefit of the aluminum shelving over the wooden shelving. You don't get nearly the deformation that you would on a wooden farm. So, and that is... now we're going to move. This is what a first break looks like. This is a very traditional first break. This one's probably going to pick about 4 pounds of mushrooms per square feet, or per square foot rather. Each room has about 10,000 square feet in it, so you're looking at obviously about 40,000 pounds of mushrooms per room.
Wow.
So, and then its weight counterpart would be just about 4.25 to 4.5 pounds with similar coverage. So you would get a little bit more, but the second and third break is where the whites just walk away.
Yeah.
So this would be a second break brown. And as you can tell, obviously the quality is not nearly as good. It's just, color's not the same. The size isn't the same. Most of the nutrients that the brown mushroom can use has been used up in first break.
Okay.
If we're lucky for this time of year and the compost we're using, if you get about 1.5 pounds off of second break, you did a very good job. Everybody will be very happy with you. So that's going to put you about 5.5 pounds per square foot, or about 55,000 pounds for the room. Whereas its white counterpart, you'd be about 4.5 on first break and about 3 on second break. So you'd already be about 7.5 pounds. So you'd have 20,000 more pounds. Then your third break would probably give you another 10,000 pounds.
Okay.
So you're significantly more profit in the white side than the brown side.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it for the pictures.
All right. So harvesting then, do people have little trolleys and they pick directly into the bins that they're going to sell in, or do they get picked into bulk bins and then they go, like bigger crates and then go to like
Mm-hmm.
racks?
So there's several different ways of doing it. On our facility, we just have actual hangers that clip onto the side of the bed, and it's just an aluminum frame. It can hold either the black baskets, which we actually have some here, which is convenient. So this would be your standard. It's a 10-pound basket.
Okay.
So this is pretty much the industry standard. A good picker can pick about 25 of them an hour. So that's about 250, 260 pounds an hour. You're really doing a good job at that point.
Yeah.
The other thing we do primarily is, the little blue trays you see at the grocery store. Yeah. We pick directly off the bed into them. Okay. The only thing that gets done to them, they look like these blue trays.
Yep.
The only thing that gets done when they go to the packing room is they get saran wrapped. That's it. Okay. So everything's handled on farm. They went right from the bed into that container.
So when you're harvesting, are you twisting them out, or you're not cutting them out?
Yeah, you're gonna do a pull and a twist all in one motion. And the guys are amazing. They can actually pull and twist with their individual fingers. That's how much dexterity you develop after time. So they might be physically touching 4 mushrooms and rotating their hand in a way that's going to twist 4 individual mushrooms and pull it. So
is it normally paid by the piece or by the hour with those?
By the piece.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's huge incentive to be fast. I mean, a very proficient picker, it would be reasonable to be $25 to $35 an hour for picking mushrooms, which is a good wage. I mean, for
I'm assuming a lot of that is that H2A, or is it local people, or?
The vast majority of our stuff are local people because it is a year-round operation. We have to be careful with getting people in every 6 months, and they have to go back, and it just gets tricky. So for us, it's much easier just to locally source people, and it also gives you a much better feeling of community within the farm when it's people from the area who work on it, as opposed to, we just bring these guys in for 6 months and then they leave and we get another new group.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so then it goes to where they get processed, and then you go into a walk-in cooler until they get picked up by a truck?
Pretty much when we deliver the mushrooms, they go immediately from the truck onto the packing room floor. They're either saran wrapped, sliced, or souped is pretty much the three major options. They'll be moved into a storage area for maybe 24 hours, usually less. And within 24 hours, they're on a truck to their final destination.
Okay.
So we have each packing room is different depending on how much volume you move. We move a massive amount of volume, so it's much easier to have a fast turnaround. But like, for example, during COVID, we were throwing away up to 250,000 pounds of mushrooms a day because there was no restaurants open. There was nothing to do with them. So we actually had all of the food banks within a 100-mile radius were turning away mushrooms because they just said we just physically cannot take any more product.
Oh my gosh.
And that went on for about 3 months. So 250,000 pounds a day for 3 months.
That is mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you figure a tractor trailer can hold roughly 30 to 35,000 pounds of mushrooms. So you figure that's about 90 tractor trailers a day of mushrooms just being thrown away.
And you have to harvest them?
Oh, you can leave them on the bed, but they'll go open and bad either way. So we did get to a point where we stopped harvesting them and just left them on the bed and steamed the room off. But either way, you still lose the money.
Yeah. Okay, so you'd mentioned steaming the room off. So let's talk about, you do your second flush, and then, or maybe on the whites you do a third flush, and then you turn the steam on and steam the entire room to basically kill everything off?
Yeah, so basically the only thing we take out of rooms are the fluorescent lights. They get pulled on the last day of picking, and the guys love the last day of picking because they just dump the stumps right onto the bed. They don't have to sweep everything up and clean it. It gets dumped.
Yeah.
We pull the lights out, and then we have a low-pressure steam boiler. It runs about 15 PSI, which is obviously a much safer alternative to the high-pressure boilers. And then we'll run that for up to 48 hours if we have time. We'll open the doors up. It'll get cleaned out. The nets that it's sitting on, there's a large drum that'll undo the nets into a conveyor and out to a truck. And
okay, so it pulls it right back out. Gotcha.
Yep. Yeah, it pulls it right out of front and then drops it down onto a conveyor. The joke in the mushroom industry is it always involves a conveyor and a truck, no matter what you're doing. It's like, you want to fill, you need a conveyor and a truck. You want to clean out,
Yeah.
And then it will be pressure washed, sealing the floor rather, and then we will steam it again for another 48 hours at about 150 degrees.
Okay, and then how long do you wait before you refill?
For example, on my current schedule, I will steam Friday, Saturday. I'll clean out Sunday. It'll get steamed. It'll get cleaned out Sunday, washed Monday, steamed Monday, Tuesday, filled Wednesday.
Oh, wow. So it's just turning.
There's no break. There's no, and if you have to replace boards or whatnot, well, as they're cleaning out, make sure you start replacing them because the guys with the pressure washers are coming. So it's a very tight schedule.
Yeah. Where do you see that the button mushroom industry going? Is it going to stay the same? Are there any major improvements coming, or is it just that's how it is? Yeah, I think that over time, and especially the trends we've seen over the last 12 months, even pre-COVID, it is trending down. The white button mushroom is not nearly as popular as it was 10 years ago. There's a lot more interest in the exotic side, and there's a lot more interest in the brown side. So a lot of people are switching over, especially when they're in the grocery store. The creminis always look nicer. They're always more appealing. I mean, you could just beat up a cremini and it doesn't bruise. It doesn't, so they're much easier to sell in a retail setting. So I think if retail continues to be more popular, it's definitely going to be more cremini. And a cremini is much easier to grow on a smaller scale. It's much more forgiving than the white button mushroom. However, you sacrifice yield. Gotcha. Yeah.
But with the white button mushroom, if you do one wrong water at the wrong time, you could ruin your entire crop. So you kind of got to weigh the options of at least you're getting a guaranteed number of browns.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gary, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a fascinating conversation. Just to kind of, we've been talking in this whole summit about all different things. We're talking about small scale, but it's really interesting to see how they do it on the big scale and how that all works. Now, one final thing, talk to us about the mushroom compost, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize is out there, and it's absolutely a fabulous soil amendment and frequently a lot cheaper than actually buying local compost just because it's a waste product for you.
Yeah, a lot of times, especially if you're relatively local to a mushroom farm, the clean out crews or the clean out companies will be more than happy to deliver as many truckloads as you can imagine. I mean, we'll have people that'll take 25 tons and say, hey, how many of those tons do you want? I mean, not only will you not have to pay for it, it's delivered to your home. We spread it on farmers' fields. They generally see 10 to 15% increase in yields for corn generally.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very easy commodity to come by, and it's extremely good for gardens.
Yeah,
so
it's extremely safe because it's been pasteurized literally days before it came out.
Yeah, and it was also pre-pasteurized even before we filled it.
Yeah.
So it's, and any chemical or anything like that the farm may or may not have used, all the chemicals they used were approved on a food item, weeks before you're even going to touch the compost.
Yeah.
So, and then the vast majority of them, I mean, our half-life, the longest half-life we have is 36 hours. That's the longest.
Yeah.
Primarily, the only chemical we use is HTH or chlorine, and obviously within 24 hours, it's completely untestable. So,
yeah. Yes. And that's a mix of, again, you said straw, horse manure, and a lot of peat moss, which, I mean, we actually buy peat moss in here in Ohio by the pallet because we use it, we spread it. So, I mean, like, this is actually like getting the peat moss for free. Yeah. The biggest thing you're going to pay is the trucking. Well, where we are in Ohio, we would obviously have to pay because we're hours and hours away. But and there's actually places out here that sell it. But yeah, it's definitely a great thing, and we used that for years until we just couldn't get it any longer. So
the other thing, if you're local to a mushroom farm, in general, they'll clean right out into a pickup truck or a dump trailer. So you don't even have to get them to truck it to you. If you say, hey, what days do you guys clean out? Hey, Sunday or Monday or whatever. Well, if you back the truck under the conveyor, they'll just fill up your truck for you and send you on your way.
Yes. I did destroy my universal joints that way one time.
Well, I was hauling a trailer of peat moss recently, and we twisted the frame on a pickup truck. So it's interesting how much moisture content plays into weight, because peat moss is mostly moisture. So if you have something that's really wet, it could be 50 or 60% heavier than you think it is.
Yeah. Very cool.
But in general, though, I would suggest anybody who wants to get into it, I would highly suggest trying to source a commercially produced compost. That's going to be your biggest hurdle to growing.
Yeah. And now, where are other places in the country that are basically production points? Because obviously you've got Kennett Square, which is probably the largest in the country, but then I know there's other places in the U.S.
Yeah, up in near Reading, Pennsylvania is another one. It's about an hour and a half north of Kennett Square, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Out west there's several places in Southern California that do it. There's also in Oklahoma, Miami, Oklahoma actually, is they produce compost there. If you're on the northern part of the United States, in general, you can find a Canadian supplier that will produce commercially. The Mexican suppliers are trickier to deal with because they have a very different set of standards than we do, and their inspection process is very different. So if you know who you're getting it from, they do a fantastic job. I've used it plenty. Yeah. The problem is just the regulations and the rules just aren't the same. They're not as consistent as they're very state-based as far as agricultural regulations from our experience, as opposed to obviously the U.S. is very federally based with USDA and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I would caution anybody from stuff coming out of Mexico or overseas, really do your research. Yeah. Anything out of Canada, I would feel 100% comfortable using.
Yeah.
And then anything out of the U.S., I would feel comfortable using.
Yeah, I know some people are doing shiitake out of China, and that's just scares the heck out of me.
I can say, and it's interesting because I was completely on the fence of the anti-Chinese logs. I didn't like it. I didn't want anything to do with them. After a year of several companies in the U.S. trying to discredit them, actively trying to send them to labs, trying to find something they've done wrong, they could not find one single thing that was not entirely safe.
Interesting.
They were doing, spent millions of dollars in research and legal fees and everything they could do to physically prove that these logs were dangerous or not safe or anything. And not saying that they could not be one day unsafe, but as of today, there has not been one contaminated log that's come out of China.
Well, that is very good to know. That's really good to know.
Which I was on the complete camp of, I wouldn't, always kind of double check, but they've yet to find one that's been contaminated.
Very cool.
So.
Well, thank you again so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's a fascinating conversation, and huge credit to your wife for forcing you to do this.
The other thing, also, if anybody wants more information, we have the actual outline of the entire process on our website. Is it okay if I plug that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's honeymoonfarmspa.com.
Okay, and we'll link to that right below the presentation as well, so people can go right there.
Yeah, and then she does a much better job as far as explaining it and that kind of stuff to it. And but like I said, anybody that wants to get into it, I'd highly recommend it. It's an amazing hobby. Even if you just keep it at a hobby level, the business opportunities are, limitless. The more you can innovate, the better you'll be.
Yeah.
Just the only real barrier to entry is the compost side.
Yeah, fine. Okay, well, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I need to put shoes, and that's all. I'm ready. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Only money. What? I don't eat any more chicken, by the way. Oh, I'm full too. I think contact that. And I don't want to have sugar. Oh, fuck, I think I just overdid it today. Where's my money? Are you planning on buying some artwork? Oh, you're not. How do you organize your AA meeting? Through Facebook, yeah? So you have to schedule it, right? Well, you don't have to. You can do it whenever. Because I'm thinking for tomorrow's meeting with everyone from the group, we just do a Facebook group. Good job. Where the fuck is my pants? Yona. Yona. Where are my black pants? Help me. This is so annoying. Help me. Don't do OnlyFans thing. Oh, you're doing OnlyFans? Oh, yeah. Help me find pants. I can never find anything. Why would you wear this? Because I need my wallet. Buying the stuff I will receive. It will cost me super expensive. I will pay it. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay, that's gonna be expensive. Like 15. No. Whatever. Like 1/5 of underwear. Oh, I need a mat. Oh, I have a mat. So I've created the room now. And then I just join it whenever, right? I'm taking these mats. I think they're yours. Maybe see Anna's mats. So who are they? Yeah, but alright, I'll take them. Anyway, I don't use a mask because I don't need
walking away with 2 books and a jumper in the basket. Brooding a superstar. Enjoy.